Despite being the division of the Captain Commander himself, the first division of the Gotei 13 has always felt like, to me at least, that it has an undeniable air of mystery surrounding it, and I think that stems from the fact that we're never really allowed to get up close and personal with this particular division. They always feel like they are quite aloof and separate from the rest of the Gotei 13, even when they seem to be bearing the weight of Soul Society's own history on their shoulders. What little we seemingly do know about the First Division is that it is a division made up of seemingly quite mature Shinigami, seemingly Shinigami that are acting as model examples for the rest of the officers within the Court Guard squads, and I imagine that most of these officers are following the enduring legacy set by Yamamoto and Sasakibe. And so join me as we begin this new short series in the run-up to the anime, where we recap the individual divisions of the Gotei 13. We look at the prominent figures of each division, their role in the Bleach storyline, and a timeline of events that takes us to where that division is in the present day. Before we start the video, however, if you haven't hit subscribe yet, make sure to do that now, as you're in the perfect place for Bleach content like this every single week. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up as well, as it really helps me and the channel. It shows the video some love on the old YouTube algorithm and means that more Bleach fans like yourselves get a chance to see it. And if you want to take that support from me a little step further, we do also have a Patreon for the channel as well, where you can get videos like this one early, and you can support me there for as little as $1 a month. And of course, every name on screen right now is somebody doing just that. They're supporting me over there on Patreon, helping me do what I love and bringing you Bleach content like this every single week. So as always, an enormous shout out to all of you. Thank you so very much. And before we dive into this video, just a warning beforehand that we will be discussing the events of the 1000-year Blood War arc of the Bleach manga, so if you haven't yet had a chance to read it, or you're simply waiting for the anime, then do be warned that there are spoilers ahead. So let's begin with a general overview of the First Division. As I said before, they're a strange one, I think. They don't really ever kind of open themselves up to us as readers, I suppose. And I think that does stem from the fact that they are definitely a very mature division, and that obviously isn't helped by the fact that it's headed by two extremely old men, and even the third seat, Okikiba, is also seemingly quite ancient as well. But this division absolutely embodies the Soul Society itself. It is Soul Society's own wills and laws personified, and that is of course reinforced by those prominent figureheads. Shigekuni Genryusai Yamamoto is one of the most enduring icons of authority and power the Soul Society has ever seen. In fact, he is the founder of the Gotei 13, and for at least over 1,000 years, according to Yamamoto himself, no Shinigami was born that was stronger than he was. And then there's his vice captain Chojuro Tadaoki Sasakibe, a steadfast icon of loyalty, someone who stood by his captain's side right through to the very end. And I think these two characters truly embody the core tenets of what it means to be a member of the First Division. All the Shinigami within this division, I believe, are meant to be exemplary examples of what it means to be a model Shinigami. They're supposed to be groomed for leadership and in a position where they can be an example to everybody else. It's a great honor to be accepted into the First Division because it is quite a big deal. And I think that contributes to this whole idea of the First Division feeling very separate from the rest of them. We kind of see many of the antics that the other divisions get up to, but the First Division has always had this almost air of superiority, but also, you know, longevity about it as well. It's been around and potentially in this totally unchanged form since the earliest days of the Gotei 13, and in that sense, it is almost like that anchor point of the Gotei. It has seemingly never changed, at least not that we know anyway, up until, of course, the seismic events of the 1000-year Blood War. And in many ways, it's this absolute transformation of the First Division that helped make those early days of the 1000-year Blood War so captivating, to me at least anyway. And you really see it shift from this kind of steadfast, traditionalist division that seems to embody the kind of oldest values of the Soul Society, potentially to a fault, into something brand new, blossoming into something a little more unorthodox, a little edgier perhaps, something that's not quite going to abide by the laws to the letter as much as Yamamoto did. And at least until the Thousand Year Blood War, that really is what the First Division stood for. Soul Society, its ancient traditions, and following the law, abiding by the law. The law of Soul Society should be respected and adhered to above all else. And we see this to a fault in the Soul Society arc. Yamamoto is so desperate to follow the laws passed down by the Central 46 that he is effectively blinded by them. You see this clash of ideals between Yamamoto and his prodigal sons Ukitake and Kyoraku. The two of them are seeking what they know, or at least believe to be, true justice, a true sense of their own law, taking it into their own hands, whereas Yamamoto is unflinching, relentless in the way he won't question what he is being told, the laws that are being passed down, and of course is having the rug pulled out from underneath him by Aizen the entire time, to the point where he would condemn an innocent soul to death simply to follow the laws of Soul Society. This all feeds in nicely to the division's personal insignia. Each of the 13 divisions of the Gotei 13 have a flower as their insignia, and the first division's is the chrysanthemum, which here symbolises the seeking of truth and innocence, which again takes us right back to that idea of justice. The first division seemingly like, you know, the keepers of truth and justice within the Soul Society, meting out punishments to those they deem necessary, but as I mentioned a minute ago, to a fault in the fact that their quest for justice can blind even their best judgment. And of course, the fact that the First Division is such a stalwart, such a bastion for Soul Society's laws and ways, that's why it's such a big deal and such good character development for Yamamoto, that he's able to bend even slightly into granting Ichigo his powers back in the Lost Agent arc. That shows you just the magnitude and the weight of the debt that Yamamoto clearly felt they owed Ichigo, rightfully so as well, for saving them all from Aizen. But I really did like that. Although Yamamoto, you know, he's quite statuesque, quite unflinching in the way he acts, the way he looks, as you would be if you'd been alive for several millennia, again, bearing that Soul Society weight as a burden on your shoulders. Yamamoto may not look outwardly any different as time goes by, but inside he is changing ever so slightly, and that is shown so well in that big moment where he openly defies Soul Society law, quite brazenly, because he feels they owe Ichigo, and I think that's a great moment, and that also shows as well the changing tides of the First Division. The chrysanthemum also symbolises loyalty and longevity, two things, again, that seem very abundant within the First Division. As I mentioned, both the figureheads Yamamoto and Sasakibe are both clearly quite old men, and Okikiba is as well. And you really do get that impression from the First Division. They are the traditional kind of, I don't want to say elderly division, but you know what I mean. And again, that does give them that air of superiority, that they kind of not necessarily lord it over everyone else, but it is that a real mark of respect for a Shinigami to make it into that division in the first place. And then, of course, the idea of loyalty is absolutely embodied by Sasakibe, perhaps more than anyone. The First Division's official colour is apparently deep purple, which makes, again, a ton of sense, because outside of the actual royal palace, they seemingly are about the closest thing to royalty within the Gotei 13, and deep purple in particular is a very regal colour. There is a real air of regality to it, and so you can really associate that with Yamamoto, who, although he would never claim to be royalty, you kind of get that sense with the amount of respect he commands and the amount of awe he commands among the Shinigami as well, so it makes sense for this division to have and bear that colour. Now, the First Division has no special duties of itself, But as I mentioned, they are expected to be model Shinigami for the rest of the Gotei 13 to follow as an example, and in many cases I've always felt that the First Division acts as almost a standard bearer for the Soul Society. They are supposed to live and breathe the most traditional and ancient values of the Soul Society and the Gotei 13 as a military organisation. This is wonderfully embodied and reinforced by Yamamoto during the fight with Aizen, when he puts everything on the line, including the lives of his fellow officers, when he uses Enetsu Jigoku, seemingly to obliterate the entire battlefield. And he says that, you know, to fight and die in the service of stopping great evil, that is what it means to be a member of the Gotei 13. And I love that. I think that right there, perhaps more than anything else in the story, absolutely sums up what it means to be a member of the First Division. It is to uphold the laws and values of Soul Society, to prevent, as he says, great evil, even if it means at the cost of your own life. And another small point about that as well, more about Yamamoto's psyche perhaps than anything, but it's really nice how he doesn't want Ichigo to be caught up in his attack, but also that stems again from these very traditional values, that he doesn't see Ichigo as really a part of the Gotei because he's a human, even though Ichigo is fully on their side and a Shinigami as well at that point. So it's both quite a nice thing that he doesn't want to get Ichigo caught up, but he also is perhaps too unwavering in his belief that Ichigo is not one of them. And this also seems to stem to his response to Orihime as well, that he doesn't want his arm to be restored by her because she's a human and she shouldn't be involved. Interestingly, we find out in the Thousand Year Blood War arc that the First Division's barracks actually sit right on top of the Grand Central Underground prison itself. And for some reason, this just never really clocked to me until that moment. I always kind of thought the prison would be kind of closer to the vicinity of Central 46. But of course, it absolutely makes a ton of sense that it would be here. These Shinigami, as I mentioned, are always seeking justice and innocence, and it makes a lot of sense then that their barracks would be situated directly on top of the sinners, essentially, of Soul Society. And of course, being the division of the Captain Commander himself, the First Division barracks are very impressive. Yamamoto's personal office has a pretty wonderful view that we get to see a couple of times, but also the barracks host the meeting halls for both captains and vice captains as well. And so I think a principal reason then why we don't ever really get a sense of necessarily the inner workings of the First Division, outside of a pretty nice tradition that Yamamoto runs where he hosts a tea party for all of the members once a month, is that because Yamamoto and, to even greater extent, Sasakibe are quite distant characters from Ichigo, our main character, whom this world essentially revolves around for us as readers, that's why they feel very distant, because Yamamoto doesn't have a close relationship with Ichigo. He has a working relationship with him at best. But as I mentioned earlier, of all the captains, he's probably one of the few who really doesn't consider Ichigo a part of them properly. So especially compared to divisions like the 11th and the 6th, for example, Yamamoto does keep kind of a fair distance from Ichigo, just because that's what the way the plot and the world building would have it. And so that's really why I think the First Division felt, and used to feel at least, quite distant from us as readers. But their story and their role within the world of Bleach is quite a fascinating one, in that it kind of goes in a direction I don't think I really ever expected. And so their role is to, you know, at least at the start of the series, is to mete out those laws that the Central 46 put down, ensure that they're being upheld, ensure that Soul Society is, you know, following this rule of law and the authority. And a lot of that authority comes from the First Division, and that kind of carries on into the Arrancar arc. But you really get the sense, as you move into the Lost Agent, that Yamamoto is softening, that the First Division in general is softening, and that of course leads to their cataclysmic fate at the start of the Thousand Year Blood War, where the First Division is essentially completely dismantled. And that's fascinating to me. What happened to the First Division is tragic, but also, like, really, really cool for the story's timeline and the continuity that within the Seirete. So we'll kind of talk about it more in detail a little bit as we move on to the prominent figures, but essentially they get razed to the ground, both figuratively and literally, and then replaced with a younger, newer model, essentially, that changes up the way they do things slightly, and I feel like we do get a little bit more of a personal insight into how the First Division actually works. So let's now look at some prominent figures of the First Division of the Gotei 13, and let's start with the obvious one, Shigekuni Genryusai Yamamoto. This incredibly ancient, stalwart defender of Soul Society, the founder of the Gotei 13, and originally a truly violent thug, a criminal who gathered other like-minded and equally violent people with him to basically form the Court Guard squads. And Yamamoto, from over 1,000 years ago, slowly changed. Although he remained an authoritarian, a figure of power within the Soul Society, although he remained that, he changed. His heart softened. He allowed the Vizards to retake their positions after losing them, despite the fact that they have hollow powers. He allowed Ichigo to restore his powers, despite that being a brazen offense in the eyes of Soul Society law. And all of this led eventually to Yamamoto's downfall and death. I've discussed what happens to this character in the 1,000-Year Blood War extensively in my Yamamoto's downfall video, but the way Kubo took this pretty rigid character and gave him some unexpected character development I thought was honestly inspired in the 1,000-Year Blood War. Now, for just a little bit of history, despite the fact that this is a historic squad of Shinigami that really does stretch back to ancient days of Soul Society, we find out precious little, and that's a shame. That's a real shame, and I would have loved to have learned more. You know, I would have loved to have seen the original Gotei, for instance. But we do get the briefest of insights into some of Yamamoto's history anyway. We know, of course, that Yamamoto founded the Shino Academy that all Shinigami must go through, or at least most of them anyway, about 2,100 years before the start of the Bleach story. And so it's difficult to say if this flashback we get of him and Sasakibe is before or after the Gotei 13 has been formed. I'm inclined to say it's after because they are already wearing Shihakusho, which is the standard uniform of the Soul Society military. Although that also raises some serious questions, and I don't really want to get too much into it. But let's just break this down very briefly because it's fun. Sasakibe, in this flashback, notes to Yamamoto that he has achieved Bankai. Now, it's said that Sasakibe learned and mastered Bankai even before Kyoraku and Ukitake were alive, and they are already two of the oldest captains in the series. We also find out from Driscoll, when he's using Koko, Gonryu, Rikyu, and some other characters as well, that Sasakibe hadn't used Bankai in over 2,000 years. Which puts this scene with him and Yamamoto, I think anyway, very, very close to the founding of the school. And I'm kind of guessing that's where Yamamoto is in this flashback, because the flashback explicitly calls him the founder of the school, and he mentions about being an instructor. So, where does that leave us in relation to the founding of the Gotei 13 itself? Has it been founded yet? Is Yamamoto still a thuggish criminal at this point? I'd seriously doubt it, because I think him founding this school was a big part of what changed him. And also, where does Senjumaru Shutara fit into all of this? Because it's, I believe, heavily implied, if not confirmed in the supplementary material, that her contribution to get her into the Zero Division was the Shinigami attire, the Shihakusho, which is an absolutely worthy invention. But if Yamamoto's already wearing it, that means Senjumaru has already created it, which I guess would imply that the Gotei 13 is already around? Or these are the absolute earliest days. So I'm guessing it took a while for Senjumaru to be promoted because she knows who Mayuri is, and Mayuri is absolutely not 2,000 years old. So that's a little bit of a kind of messes up your mind a bit thinking about that. None of that is really that important right now. I just thought it was quite a fun tangent. What's important is that Yamamoto founded the school. The school has no real direct affiliation to the First Division outside of the fact he founded it and he was an instructor there. And this was over 2,000 years ago. Sasakibe has been loyal to him for that time as well, impressing him with his Bankai back then and then effectively becoming the vice captain as well. I'm kind of fascinated by this flashback, though. I can't really leave it alone. Is this the absolute oldest period of time we have ever seen in the Bleach manga? Because this is definitely older than the Hashwolf and Basby flashback. That's about 1,000 years old, because it's just on the precipice of Yhwach's invasion of Soul Society. So this must be about 1,000 years or so before that, because it's prior to Chojuro using his Bankai. So that's kind of crazy to think about, and it's really awesome. And honestly, if the anime expands on anything, I'd love more of that sort of thing. I would happily take that. But we mostly know Yamamoto's storyline from here on out. Like I said at the start of Bleach, he acts as that real authoritarian figure, you know, trying to punish Gin Ichimaru for allowing the Ryoka to leave, trying to kind of crack the whip on the troublemaker Kyoraku and Ukitake, who he clearly thinks Kyoraku is a bad influence on, and going so far as to actually try and basically kill them with Ryujin Jaka when he learns that they have stopped the execution and are going against the will of Soul Society. Yamamoto softens a little bit, moving into the Arrancar arc, willing to accept help from the humans to some degree, working with Orihime and Ichigo, asking her to tell Ichigo about Aizen's plan and all this sort of thing. And even teaming up with the Vizards, who he believed were traitors back in Turn Back the Pendulum. But obviously the real big change for Yamamoto comes after the defeat of Aizen. He has now lost an arm thanks to his sacrifice during that fight. And that's of course a physical representation of him now being weaker both in body and spirit. At least in the eyes of bloodthirsty warlords who might be about to resurrect. In the Lost Agent arc, Yamamoto probably gets his greatest character development yet and shows a real changing of the tides in the First Division. He allows the Vizards back, he allows Kisuke Urahara to enter the Soul Society and even work with them, and of course above all gives Ichigo his powers back. And then in the 1,000-Year Blood War, everything goes wrong for the First Division. The Vandenreich declare war on the Soul Society by murdering Sasakibe in Yamamoto's own office with a very well-aimed javelin throw. And Yamamoto just goes on this absolute depression spiral, essentially, where he completely loses his mind, completely loses his footing and his kind of hold on power and responsibility, and it eventually winds up with him recklessly attacking what he believes to be Yhwach and then being stripped of his power and killed. It's a sad, somber end for the First Division, or at least the original incarnation of the First Division. We even see, again, in a very literal representation of what's actually happening to this division, the First Division barracks are annihilated by Yhwach when he appears on the battlefield, you know, again, just showcasing Kubo really hammering home that we are stripping back the First Division and starting all over again, and that's really fascinating to me. Moving on to Sasakibe, there's a little less to say about this guy because it's a bit of a running joke at this point that he does absolutely nothing in the series and is only developed posthumously once he's already gone. But, you know, he's still a pretty interesting character nonetheless. It's really cool that he just devotes himself to Yamamoto. It's very hard to say, timeline-wise, if he's the original vice-captain of the First Division or not. He's very young, over 2,000 years ago, as you would expect. It's amazing he's even alive, to be honest. And all we really know about Sasakibe having this position is that he has held it at least for 110 years because he is Yamamoto's vice-captain during the Turn Back the Pendulum arc. But I think it's a safe bet to say that he's had it for at least a couple of years prior to that as well. But, of course, Chojuro really doesn't do much. His storyline is pretty sad. He basically gets beaten up by Ichigo at the end of the Soul Society arc. Then, in the Arrancar arc, he kind of appears very briefly because he's in charge of the barrier surrounding the fake Karakura Town battle. And then he's killed at the start of the 1,000-Year Blood War, which basically kind of kicks off everything. And it's, again, another sad fate for this character to see what happens to him. He uses Bankai for the first time in 2,000 years and is instantly killed, having it stolen from him. It's pretty brutal, and it's clear that I don't think Kubo was overly interested in his character, but then he does use him nicely to develop Yamamoto a bit, which I think is pretty cool. And it's nice that he at least got some kind of use anyway. And then the only other kind of named member of the First Division, at least for now, is their third seat, Genshiro Okikiba, who basically isn't really seen. It seems like maybe he assumes some of Sasakibe's duties and that he is the one reporting to Yamamoto as the first invasion really kicks off. But outside of that, you don't really ever see him until, well, this era of the First Division is destroyed. And so after the First Division is annihilated, or the First Division as we know it anyway, and the shattered remains of Ryujin Jaka return to what's left of the barracks, the First Division transforms. It undergoes major changes for the first time in presumably at least 1,000 years, if not longer. A new captain is appointed. Shunsui Kyoraku, that troublemaker we mentioned earlier, is transferred from Division 8 to the First Division, becoming the brand new captain commander. And he's a great choice for the role, if an unorthodox one, and he accepts it reluctantly as well. Now, he actually brings his vice-captain Nanao with him from the 8th Division, and as far as I'm concerned, I imagine that's quite unusual. But before we move on, I just want to say the whole thing is highly unusual, and it's awesome we got to see it at all. I really do think it's totally different to the Vizards just retaking their old spots. This is a captain having been killed, and an existing captain being transferred to his place instead. That's something we've never seen before, and so much of what happens next is just something we've never really seen in Bleach, and again, that's so awesome for the world building. So Kyoraku takes command of the Gotei 13 during a pretty tumultuous time, to say the least. They are literally in wartime against an empire of enemies, with a pretty bloodthirsty ruler at the top who has it in for the Soul Society. But Kyoraku does a pretty good job of getting them through these choppy waters, I think, using very unorthodox and unexpected methods to do so, which I really appreciate. Unlike Yamamoto, who did take everything in his stride, he was very rigid, unflinching, statuesque. You know, like I said before, the anchor of the Soul Society. Kyoraku is far less predictable, and I think that really works in his favour. You know, almost the very first thing he does as Captain Commander is essentially manipulate the Central 46 into allowing him to have 2 vice captains, which I think is a first in Soul Society history. Basically, he says to the Central 46 that Genshiro Okikiba, that third seat we mentioned earlier, should be promoted to vice-captain because he knows the day-to-day of Squad 1 better than either Kyoraku or Nanao do, which makes a lot of sense. You know, Okikiba's been there, presumably for a while. He can handle the business affairs, but Nanao knows how to handle Kyoraku. The two of them have worked together for years and years and years, and it makes a lot of sense for her to come with him. And so they allow it because Kyoraku basically manipulates them into it and then manipulates them into allowing him to teach Kenpachi Zaraki the art of the sword. So I really like his tenure, which is still ongoing as Captain Commander. I think he does some cool stuff, again, like releasing Aizen as well. It's a highly unpopular decision, but one that proves fruitful in the end. And I just have to say briefly about that scene, that is probably the most Captain Commander Kyoraku ever feels. That scene where he reveals that he was the one who released Aizen. He then has to put forth his argument for why he thinks it was the right thing to do. And he receives major pushback from, you know, vice captains, third seats, fourth seats, etc. And that's so cool. It just shows you how much different. I know it is a time of war, but you know, Yamamoto was not the kind of character to really receive or even tolerate much pushback. You know, he just wasn't going to have it. Because, again, he has that staunchly old traditional viewpoint where he is right and everyone else is wrong. But here, Kyoraku, although he does, comes out on top by putting his perspective forwards, I love this little debate they have. It's a great moment, and it really shows how Kyoraku has a real handle on how to command these guys. And then, like I said, Kyoraku now has 2 vice captains. Nanao was transferred from Squad 8, and Okikiba was given a promotion to be the co-vice captain alongside her. This again seems to be very unusual, but this is a new Soul Society. This is a brand new First Division, and Kyoraku is here to change the way things are done, even in the face of the equally unflinching Central 46, who are, at this point, really the last bastion of Soul Society's old ways. It's interesting as well because the way Central 46 didn't seem to want Kyoraku to have 2 vice captains implies to me that they at least wanted Nanao to remain with the 8th Division and take up some kind of a leadership role, and Okikiba would be the only vice captain of Squad 1. So now the 8th Division has effectively been left leaderless in Kyoraku's wake, unless of course Tatsufasa Enjoji stepped up to the plate, which I somehow don't think. And at the end of the story, this is where we are with the First Division. Not much has changed since the start of the Thousand Year Blood War. Kyoraku, Nanao, and Genshiro Okikiba all made it out alive. And I think that's obviously done very much on purpose. You know, the First Division was the one to really go through hell, to get absolutely razed to the ground, because, as I've mentioned before, the Thousand Year Blood War arc is all about these older characters confronting their demons and being judged for it. And the First Division gets judged pretty hard. But it rises again, it comes out new, shiny new, with a new captain at the helm. And I think Okikiba, he seems like a weird character in that he basically does nothing, but Kubo's content to keep him around and keep mentioning him as well. And I think the only reason for that really is because he is a reminder of what the First Division was before this new age. It's a shame that Kyoraku's almost entire tenure as Captain Commander was during a wartime period, because we never really get to see what that division becomes after that. But here's hoping if Kubo does decide to do more of his Hell arc in the future, we might get to see a little bit more of that as well, and I would love that. Alright guys, but that's pretty much it, I think, on the First Division of the Gotei 13. Next month, of course, we'll be looking at the Second Division. There's definitely not 13 months between now and the anime coming out, so I'll have to double up on a couple of those months, I imagine, but next month will be the Second Division as well, so I hope you look forward to that. But yeah, I hope this video was interesting. Maybe it was stuff you already knew entirely, but it's really cool to kind of go back and look at these individual divisions within the Gotei 13 and take a deep dive look at really what makes them tick, who's important to them, and where they end up in the story. And like I said, Kyoraku's unorthodox, unusual leadership sense does see the Soul Society through to the other side of the Quincy War, and this is where the First Division is right now. Alright guys, but I hope you enjoyed the video. Hit subscribe if you haven't done already, and until next time, I'll catch you later. I'll see you then.